Sedona burned copper beneath the final light of evening, its sandstone cliffs glowing beyond the walls of Rowan Vale's private estate like something ancient watching something dangerous unfold. Inside the glass pavilion, the atmosphere was polished enough to disguise almost anything. Wealthy collectors studied paintings beneath museum lighting. Investors compared acquisitions over crystal glasses. Political donors drifted between executives whose fortunes had been built on businesses no one examined too closely. Among them moved men whose names rarely appeared in newspapers but were spoken carefully behind locked doors. The center of that world stood Rowan Vale, 36. Rowan had built his reputation by surviving men who believed loyalty could be purchased and betrayal could be forgiven. His tailored black suit concealed little of his massive frame, and tattoos disappeared beneath his cuffs whenever his hands rested at his sides. He did not need to threaten anyone openly. The room adjusted itself around him. Maren Hale had not come for Rowan. The 29-year-old provenance investigator had been hired independently to verify several pieces scheduled for transfer into a museum foundation. Her reputation depended on details other people ignored, which was why one 18th-century landscape troubled her almost immediately. The auction catalog listed the painting in private storage during a period when an older insurance record placed it in Europe. A custom stamp carried the correct seal but the wrong formatting for that year. The restoration history included a storage facility that had not existed when the entry was supposedly created. Any single error could have been clerical. 3 together looked deliberate. Maren followed the documentation through publicly available records first. Then she found a reference number pointing toward an internal Avery Marston acquisition file stored elsewhere inside the estate. She could have ignored it. Instead, she followed the trail. The private archive sat beyond a quiet corridor removed from the auction crowd. Maren entered after finding the door unsecured during a scheduled staff transfer, fully aware she was crossing into restricted space but believing the records could determine whether the museum accepted stolen or falsely documented property. Inside, she photographed only the pages connected to the questionable painting. She compared inventory codes, dates, shipping numbers, and handwritten transfer notes. She never noticed the security camera above the doorway changing direction. Hours earlier, Rowan had received information that a rival organization intended to place someone inside his estate during the auction. That warning had already sharpened every instinct he possessed, so when Gideon Shaw informed him that an unidentified woman had been found inside the restricted archive photographing private records, Rowan did not see an investigator following inconsistencies. He saw preparation for an attack. By the time he entered the archive, 2 security men stood near the doorway and Maren had already placed her phone on the table voluntarily. She remained composed despite the obvious danger surrounding her. That calmness bothered Rowan more than panic would have. Gideon searched her handbag. Her identification matched the Museum Foundation's records. Her notebooks contained legitimate research. Nothing initially suggested organized crime. Then his hand stopped. He removed a slim encrypted electronic device from beneath the inner lining of Maren's bag. Maren stared at it without recognition. Rowan recognized the engraved symbol immediately. It belonged to the organization that had threatened him that morning. The most dangerous thing about Maren was no longer that she appeared guilty. It was that someone had worked very hard to make certain she could never prove she was innocent. Rowan had entered the archive believing he had caught a spy, but when the rival link device appeared inside Maren's own bag, even she could no longer explain how innocent she looked. The encrypted device changed the room before anyone moved. Rowan did not order Maren restrained or dragged below the estate. Instead, he had Gideon escort her to the stone library overlooking the Western Canyon, a quieter room lined with dark shelves, old maps, and floor-to-ceiling windows flashing white whenever lightning cut across Sedona. Maren remained under watch, but no one touched her. That restraint did not make Rowan less dangerous. He had learned years earlier that fear exposed people more efficiently than violence. A liar usually rushed to fill silence. A guilty person often offered explanations before anyone asked for them. Maren did neither. She sat across the long library table with her credentials, research notebook, and phone placed openly before her. She did not invent an explanation for the device because she had none. Instead, she concentrated on what she could prove. Her professional records matched. Her contract with the Museum Foundation matched. More importantly, The first notes in her research had been created almost 6 weeks before she received an invitation to Rowan's auction. That detail forced Rowan to reconsider the timeline. Maren had already been investigating suspicious provenance patterns before she knew she would ever enter his estate. She organized copies of shipping manifests, insurance records, restoration reports, and ownership histories across the table. Several paintings connected to Rowan's collection contained the same subtle inconsistencies she had discovered that evening. The problem reached beyond forged paperwork. One name appeared repeatedly near the earliest questions surrounding those pieces. Boris Bell. The respected curator had spent decades building a reputation around meticulous authentication work until accusations of professional misconduct destroyed it almost overnight. Maren's research suggested Iris had not falsified anything. She had noticed the same irregularities. Someone had destroyed her credibility before she could prove them. For the first time since entering the archive, Rowan's suspicion shifted away from Maren by a fraction. Outside, the storm worsened. Rain hammered the glass. Lightning illuminated the Red Rock Canyon in violent bursts. Water poured down the steep private road until red desert soil turned into thick moving mud. Within minutes, security reported that the main access route was no longer passable. Guests could not leave. Neither could anyone arrive easily. Then the communications began failing. The estate's external cameras vanished one by one from the security network. Gideon crossed the library with a tablet showing black surveillance feeds. The system had not failed because of the storm. Someone had shut sections of it down deliberately. Worse, the command had originated inside Rowan's own network. The intellectual danger struck harder than the physical one. Rowan had spent years believing outsiders were the greatest threat to his survival. Yet someone inside his walls was now using systems available only to people he trusted. Maren studied the disabled camera map. Pattern emerged immediately. Not every exterior camera had been cut. Only those covering the archive corridor, the service passage behind it, and the private loading entrance were gone. Whoever had shut them down knew exactly which angles could reveal movement near the records she had discovered. Rowan looked toward the storm-dark windows, then back at the woman he had accused. Maren might still be dangerous, but she was no longer the only person he needed to fear. By the time the storm buried the road beneath red mud and rushing water, Rowan realized the spy he feared might not have entered his estate at all, because the betrayal had started from inside it. The storm erased whatever remained of normality inside the estate. Thunder rolled through the Red Rock Canyon hard enough to vibrate the glass walls, and every few minutes the lights dimmed before recovering. Rowan ordered the auction guests moved away from the exterior rooms and into secured sections of the property, while Gideon reorganized security around the growing internal threat. Maren remained near Rowan. Not because he trusted her. Because she understood the records better than anyone else in the building. Copied manifests and acquisition files were brought into the library under supervision. Maren worked through them systematically, refusing to speculate where documents could answer instead. Patterns slowly emerged. Several paintings with questionable provenance had been shipped through companies that appeared legitimate on paper but existed only briefly. Those same shell companies became active around periods when Rowan's organization had entered disputes with rival crews. Storage fees became transportation payments. Insurance settlements became unexplained transfers. Artwork appeared to be functioning as camouflage for money and movement. Rowan studied the records beside her and understood the implication before Gideon did. Parts of his legitimate art operation had been manipulated to hide transactions Rowan himself had never authorized. For Maren, another surprise followed. Rowan did not react like an impulsive criminal discovering missing money. He compared dates, asked for supporting records, and rejected conclusions that depended on assumptions. His intimidating reputation concealed a mind built around control and pattern recognition. Rowan was making his own observations. Maren had been given several opportunities to save herself with convenient lies. She never took them. Every claim she made could be checked. Every uncertainty remained an uncertainty. That bothered his suspicion more than any emotional plea could have. Gideon eventually returned Maren's phone after technicians confirmed there was no connection between it and the encrypted device discovered in her bag. Rowan took the phone from him. For a moment, Maren expected another condition. Instead, Rowan placed it on the table within her reach. There was no apology. But there was also no longer an assumption that everything she touched belonged under his control. The gesture was small enough for anyone else to miss. Maren did not. Then the generator failed. The library lights vanished, forcing them into a smaller stone study connected to the interior hall. Emergency lamps cast warm amber light across the walls while lightning repeatedly illuminated the canyon through a narrow window. The room brought Rowan and Maren closer than either preferred. There was tension between them now that had nothing to do with accusation. Maren could feel the physical force of his presence without mistaking it for the entirety of him. Rowan noticed the steadiness in her even after hours of suspicion and danger. She continued helping. That was what unsettled him most. Maren owed Rowan nothing. He had treated her as a possible enemy, searched her belongings, and kept her under guard. Still, she remained because Iris Bell and others outside Rowan's world had already suffered for whatever was hidden inside these records. For Rowan, that fact cracked something deeper than suspicion. He had built his life around transactions, leverage, loyalty bought through shared risk. Maren was offering help without asking him for anything. Then she stopped over one forged shipping authorization. A code appeared beneath the transfer number. Rowan recognized it immediately. It was private, restricted, known to only 3 men. And one of those men had stood beside Rowan through almost every war he had survived. The forged authorization carried a code known by only 3 men, and one of them was the man Rowan had trusted longer than anyone alive. The authorization code did not prove Silas Vane was guilty, but it was enough to make Rowan stop breathing normally. Silas had been beside him for 15 years. He had survived raids, funerals, betrayals, and the kind of nights that turned alliances into graves. When others disappeared, Silas stayed. Rowan had trusted him with routes, accounts, weapons, names, and weaknesses no enemy had ever been allowed to see. That history made the evidence harder to accept. Maren did not push him toward an accusation. She returned to the records. One transaction at a time, she rebuilt the timeline across the stone study table. A disputed painting transfer appeared first, then an insurance loss. Weeks later, money moved through a shell company. Soon after, one of Rowan's crews was attacked by men he believed were working for a rival family. The sequence repeated. Different artwork, different companies, different enemies, same pattern. Conflict created confusion. Confusion created opportunities for money to move. And someone close enough to Rowan had been benefiting every time violence made ordinary accounting impossible to follow. Silas had not simply stolen from him. He appeared to have been manufacturing instability, feeding rivalries from both sides and making himself more valuable each time Rowan needed someone he believed he could trust. Maren found another connection buried inside old correspondence. Iris Bell had questioned the provenance of 2 paintings years earlier. Within months, anonymous allegations accused her of falsifying authentication records. Donors withdrew. Institutions stopped returning calls. Her reputation collapsed before she could publicly challenge the collection. The evidence now suggested that destruction had been deliberate. Rowan stared at the documents without moving. His greatest survival rule had always been suspicion. He questioned strangers. He tested allies. He assumed everyone had a price. But Silas had survived the testing long enough to become the exception. And that exception may have been the weakness Silas exploited most. The woman Rowan had mistrusted for a single hour was now placing facts in front of him more honestly than the man he had trusted for 15 years. The realization cut deeper than financial betrayal. Maren saw it in the stillness of his face. For the first time, Rowan did not look untouchable. He looked like a man discovering that years of loyalty might have been carefully engineered around him. Something in Maren's view of him changed. Not into sympathy exactly. Into recognition. Behind the size, tattoos, money, and controlled menace was someone who had built his entire life around avoiding betrayal and had still failed to see the one closest to him. Rowan noticed her watching. He also noticed what she did not do. She did not exploit the fracture. She did not use his uncertainty to bargain for freedom. She simply continued checking the evidence. That restraint unsettled him more than accusation would have. Then Gideon entered the study with a new problem. Silas was no longer where security expected him to be. His assigned sector was empty. His phone had stopped transmitting location data. Before Rowan could react, a sharp internal alarm sounded through the estate. Red emergency lights flickered in the corridor. A second later, the smell of smoke reached the study. Maren turned toward the archive wing. Rowan understood instantly. Silas was no longer trying to hide the evidence. He was trying to erase it. When smoke began pouring from the private archive, Rowan finally understood what Silas intended to destroy, and Maren was the only person who knew which evidence mattered most. Smoke thickened along the archive corridor as emergency lights flashed through the estate. Rowan moved first, directing Gideon toward the security wing while trying to contain whatever Silas had started. Maren should have stayed behind. She refused. The original provenance ledger was still somewhere near the archive, and if the fire destroyed it, Iris Bell's name might never be cleared. Worse, whatever had been hidden behind Rowan's legitimate art business could disappear with it. Maren remembered something from the restoration plans she had reviewed earlier. An old service passage ran behind the archive wall and descended into a reinforced storm shelter carved directly into the red rock foundation beneath the estate. If the main corridor was compromised, that passage was their only route. For the first time that night, Rowan followed Maren instead of ordering her where to go. She led him through a narrow maintenance door while rain hammered the structure above them. They had barely reached the service corridor when one of Silas's men appeared from the opposite end. Rowan reacted instantly. He stepped between Maren and the attacker before she fully understood the threat. The confrontation was fast and brutal. Rowan forced the man back, but during the struggle, he was driven hard into the stone wall. Pain tore across his side and shoulder, slowing him immediately. Gideon reached them seconds later and forced the attacker away long enough to secure the passage. Maren could have continued alone. The shelter was close. The evidence mattered. Rowan was injured. Leaving him would have been the safest choice. He stayed. Maren pulled Rowan's arm across her shoulders and helped support his weight through the descending passage. His size made every step difficult, but she refused to let him collapse. The irony was impossible to ignore. Hours earlier, Rowan had treated her as a potential spy. Now the woman he had suspected was the one keeping him on his feet. Inside the storm shelter, Maren found emergency medical supplies and treated the injury as carefully as she could. Rowan remained unusually quiet while she worked. He had spent years believing survival depended on leverage. Maren had none. She was helping him because she chose to. That realization affected him more deeply than the injury itself. While searching the shelter for additional supplies, Maren noticed an old waterproof archive case pushed beneath a storage shelf. Inside was a ledger, older than the records upstairs, more complete. Maren opened it expecting financial history. Instead, she found a map of betrayal. Payments tied Silas to shell companies that had funded attacks on rival crews. False insurance claims had financed operations designed to look like retaliation. Anonymous warnings had been sent to Rowan before conflicts Silas himself had helped create. Every manufactured crisis had pushed Rowan deeper into paranoia. Then Maren found her own name. A payment had been authorized days before the auction. Another notation referenced the encrypted device planted inside her bag. Silas had planned to frame her as a rival operative. Her death afterward would have appeared justified. Rowan would have blamed the rival organization. And the war Silas needed would finally have become unavoidable. Maren now had proof she had been innocent from the beginning. Yet instead of using Rowan's weakness to escape, she remained beside the wounded man who had every reason to become her enemy. Then she turned the final pages. The ledger cleared Maren's name, but the final pages contained enough evidence to destroy Silas and tear apart half of Rowan's empire with him. The storm still hammered the Red Rock Foundation while dawn remained hours away. Inside the shelter, Maren spread the backup ledger across a metal table and worked through the final entries one line at a time. What she had found did more than prove Silas had framed her. It exposed a chain of financial crimes tied directly to businesses operating under Rowan's name. Some transactions had been hidden from him. Others had passed through companies he controlled. If the ledger reached investigators, Silas could be destroyed. So could large parts of Rowan Vale's empire. The choice became brutally simple. Rowan could burn the book, erase the evidence, blame the entire operation on Maren, and preserve the organization he had spent years building. He had enough power to make that version believable. Maren knew it. Rowan knew she knew it. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Rowan looked at the pages differently than before. For years, loyalty had been the foundation beneath everything he believed. He rewarded it, demanded it, and treated suspicion as survival. Now he understood the flaw. Loyalty without truth had become another form of blindness. Silas had not defeated Rowan by earning too little trust. He had defeated him by earning so much that Rowan stopped asking questions. Protecting the empire now would require repeating the same mistake in a different form. Worse, it would require sacrificing Maren. If Rowan destroyed the ledger and allowed her to remain the convenient spy, then every change she had forced him to confront during the night would become meaningless. He would simply prove that power mattered more than truth. Rowan reached for the ledger. Maren tensed. Instead of taking it away, he placed it fully into her hands. Then he stepped back. The gesture carried more weight than any apology could have. For the first time in Rowan's life, he gave another person enough truth to ruin him completely. No condition followed. No demand for silence. No promise of protection in exchange for loyalty. Maren could secure the ledger independently, hand it to authorities, expose everything, and still walk away from him afterward. Rowan accepted that. The cost could be millions. Territory. Lies. Possibly freedom. Maren stared at him and realized this was not a performance designed to make her trust him. He had made the choice while believing she might never see him again. That changed something between them. The attraction that had been building beneath suspicion, danger, and restraint finally surfaced. Maren stepped toward him first. She closed the distance and pressed a brief, controlled kiss against his mouth. Rowan responded carefully, without pulling her closer or turning the moment into possession. It lasted only seconds. The danger outside had not disappeared. Neither had the consequences waiting beyond the storm. Then Gideon's radio crackled from the shelter entrance. A damaged communication channel had finally connected to the main estate. The information was worse than expected. Silas had convinced several loyal guards that Rowan had been compromised and that Maren was controlling him through fabricated evidence. He had divided the estate from inside. And he knew the storm shelter existed. A pale wash of headlights suddenly appeared through the rain beyond the reinforced entrance. Rowan turned toward the glow. Maren tightened her grip on the ledger. Rowan surrendered the evidence before realizing Silas was already outside, coming for both the truth and the woman holding it. The headlights beyond the shelter entrance stopped moving. For several seconds, only rain remained. The worst of the monsoon had begun drifting east, but the canyon roads were still damaged. The estate was divided, and Rowan knew Silas had chosen the one place where escape would be hardest. He moved Maren toward the reinforced courtyard entrance while Gideon positioned himself near the stone wall. Then Silas appeared. He was not frantic. That made him more dangerous. For 15 years, Silas had survived by becoming necessary. Every rivalry he intensified made Rowan depend on him more. Every manufactured attack justified tighter control. Every betrayal he secretly created convinced Rowan that trust should become narrower. Conflict had been Silas's business model. Paranoia had been his protection. Maren had never mattered to him personally. Until she found the records. Now she stood holding the one ledger capable of exposing everything he had built inside Rowan's empire. Silas positioned himself where he could threaten Maren while keeping Rowan from closing the distance safely. Rowan saw an opening almost immediately. Years of violence had trained him to recognize one. But taking it would place Maren directly inside the danger. The old Rowan would have calculated acceptable loss. This Rowan could not. He lowered his weapon. For Silas, that decision looked like weakness. For Rowan, it felt like the first honest act of strength he had made all night. Silas had spent years convincing him that power meant never giving an enemy leverage. Maren had taught him something harder. Sometimes strength meant allowing someone else's life to matter more than winning. Silas tightened control over the situation and demanded the ledger and every duplicate connected to it. Maren remained still. But she was not helpless. During her earlier review of the estate restoration plans, she had noticed the canyon courtyard's emergency storm system. The reinforced shutters and floodlights could be activated manually from a recessed control near the entrance. Silas never noticed her shifting position by inches. Rowan did. He understood immediately and resisted the instinct to stop her. For once, he trusted someone else's plan completely. Maren reached the control. The courtyard exploded with white emergency light. Heavy storm shutters began descending along one side, cutting across Silas's line of sight and forcing him backward. The disruption lasted only seconds. It was enough. Gideon moved first. Two guards who had finally realized Silas had manipulated them closed from the opposite side. Rowan pulled Maren behind the reinforced stone edge instead of pursuing Silas himself. The choice surprised even him. Silas was forced down and restrained before he could recover control. Rowan stood close enough to end 15 years of betrayal permanently. He did not. Silas would remain alive. The ledger would remain intact. And whatever legal, financial, and territorial consequences followed would belong to Rowan as much as anyone else. Beyond the courtyard, rain softened. The first pale line of dawn began forming above Sedona's red cliffs. Maren still held the evidence. Enough to clear herself. Enough to restore Iris Bell. Enough to destroy Silas. Enough to tear apart Rowan's empire. Rowan looked toward the estate gate. Then he ordered it opened. He did not ask Maren what she intended to do. He did not ask her to stay. When the first clear line of dawn appeared over the red rocks, Maren still held enough evidence to ruin Rowan, and Rowan opened the gate and let her decide what happened next. By sunrise, Sedona looked almost unreal. The violent monsoon had moved east, leaving the red rock cliffs washed clean beneath bands of gold and orange light. Water still ran through the lower canyon channels, but the storm no longer owned the landscape. Neither did Silas. As damaged roads reopened, outside authorities finally reached Rowan's estate. Silas was transferred alive into custody with enough evidence attached to his operation that influence alone could no longer make the problem disappear. Maren never surrendered the ledger to Rowan. More importantly, Rowan never asked her to. The documents moved through independent attorneys, museum investigators, and financial specialists rather than disappearing into private hands. Within days, Iris Bell's name began clearing. Records proved she had questioned forged provenance long before accusations destroyed her career. Several paintings connected to Rowan's collection were placed under independent review, while others were prepared for return once legitimate ownership could be established. The consequences did not stop with Silas. Businesses carrying Rowan's name faced investigations. Counts were frozen. Partners withdrew. Territory weakened as allies realized the organization was no longer protecting every secret simply because exposing it would be expensive. Rowan accepted the damage. One night had not transformed him into an innocent man. It had destroyed something more fundamental. The belief that fear, suspicion, and control were the same things as strength. Maren was free before she reached the estate gate. No guard followed her. No agreement demanded silence. No promise of protection required loyalty in return. Rowan did not ask for gratitude. He did not ask whether the brief kiss inside the shelter had meant anything. He simply allowed her to leave. And Maren did. That morning mattered because she needed to know she could walk away from Rowan Vale without consequences before she could ever choose to walk toward him again. Weeks passed. A small Sedona museum reopened an exhibition centered around restored provenance records and works cleared through independent review. Iris Bell attended publicly for the first time since the scandal had destroyed her reputation. Maren stood beneath warm afternoon light in the museum courtyard, surrounded by stone walls and desert plants glowing beneath the Arizona sun. Then she noticed Rowan. He had come alone. No intimidating security formation surrounded him. No men cleared a path. He wore a dark tailored suit, his broad frame impossible to hide, tattooed hands relaxed at his sides. He saw Maren, and waited. He did not approach. That mattered too. Maren understood what Rowan was and what he had been. Nothing about one dangerous night erased the years behind him. Rowan understood something equally important. Maren's independence was not rejection. It was the condition that made anything between them real. As sunset warmed the red cliffs beyond the museum terrace, Maren crossed the courtyard toward him. Rowan remained still until she reached him. Then Maren placed her hand voluntarily into his tattooed one. There was no promise of immediate forever. No ownership. No debt. Only the beginning of something neither of them had been forced to choose. Rowan had spent years believing everyone close enough to matter would eventually betray him. By sunrise, the woman he had mistaken for a spy had taught him the harder truth. Trust was not knowing someone could never hurt him. It was giving them the freedom to choose not to.